Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about Texas records. Whether you have ancestors from Texas or not, of course there are always some little tips and tricks to pick up about how to search in the databases of interest to you. But today we're going to focus specifically on Texas records, and the reason being is that Ancestry.com released a really large collection of super valuable Texas records last week, and so we're just going to take this opportunity to look at those records, but use those records as an example for how you could search in any state. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, just a couple of basics about searching records. I'm going to run through the basics first, and then I'll actually show you how to do that on the website. So the first thing is, if you're not familiar with the card catalog on Ancestry.com, I encourage you to always use that first in order to see what's available online. Now, there are some best practices or best ways to search it to get what you want. I'll show you that again using Texas as an example here in just a minute. But the card catalog is the definitive answer to, does Ancestry.com have X? Whatever record type, time period, location you're interested in, that card catalog is going to be your go-to place. Now, the Family History Wiki is the go-to place to discover if records even exist anywhere at all for the time period and location that you're interested in. Again, I'll use Texas as an example, but we'll take a look there and see what exists both at a state level, and this is a little bit new for some of you, we're going to drill down to a county level even this time to see what's available. And then finally, I always encourage people to search individual databases for best results and look for entire families. Don't just look for that one person that you're interested in. What you discover is as you look for families, you often are able to cobble together more information about the person of interest than had you just looked for them individually. So with that kind of a framework, let's go ahead and dive into these Texas records and see what we can learn both about Texas records and about how to use Ancestry.com a little more effectively. Let's start with the card catalog. Let's start with the Family History Wiki. You're going to find the Family History Wiki by hovering over the Learning Center button, and then you're going to go down here and click on Family History Wiki. Now, when you get here, you have a couple of options. You can go directly to the Red Book here, which will allow you to drill down by state, and then by county, and then all the way to town. So if I click on Red Book, and then I can just scroll down here to Texas. And when I get to Texas, here I have an entire article. It's actually written by Wendy Bebout Elliott, who is an amazing genealogist, where she outlines all of the information you need to know, just basic information you need to know in order to do Texas family history research. Over here on the right-hand side is a little panel with clickable links about specific Texas record types. So if I was interested in census records or land records, military records, whatever I'm interested in at a record type level for that location, I could click down. There's here an article on Native Americans of Texas and African Americans of Texas, Hispanic Americans of Texas, right? So there's all of these links to take me places to help me learn or understand more about that particular location, okay? I could also use this search box over here on the left-hand side. So in this case, I'm going to type in Texas Vital records being birth, marriage, and death records. And now here is a link to an article specifically about vital records in Texas. So what this article tells me is that mandatory recording of births and deaths did not begin in Texas until 1903. So at a state level, birth and death records were not kept until 1903. Now, marriage records were kept a little bit earlier, and of course there are birth and death records in some cases at a county level before that. Okay, so the opening paragraph here states that between 1873 and 1876, there were some births recorded by county district clerks. And so it just kind of depends. It depends on the town, it depends on the county, who decided to keep records or not. Now, if I scroll down a little bit here, what this is going to tell me about marriage records is that marriage records prior to 1836, if they exist, are likely to be in the custody of the Roman Catholic Church. Most counties started keeping marriage records upon the organization of the county. And so what that means is that you need to know when the county became a county, because prior to that, there's probably not going to be records, or the records are going to be where the county existed. So I have a favorite resource that I use in order to discover when county boundaries occurred. It's map mapofus.org, mapofus.org. And if you just scroll down here, here's a map, and I can click on a particular state, and it takes me to a page that allows me to see over time how the counties formed in that specific location. So in the case of Texas, the earliest that we're going to see any kind of information is 1834. And then I can just use this next button here, and as I click, it shows me how the boundaries changed, both of the state and of the specific counties. And it provides me with a little bit of text to tell me what particular counties were introduced, what particular counties were organized from other counties. You can see there's large county chunks, right? And then as those counties become subdivided over time, and then over here it just lists the year. So I can click through to a particular year of interest, 1846 being a big one, right? From 45 to 46, when Texas became a state, you're going to see a lot of counties subdividing and getting smaller. So remember, marriage records are going to be kept at a county level, but they're going to be in the county what it was at the time that the event occurred. So if you had family in Texas in the early 1840s or in the 1830s, make sure to check out what county it was when the event occurred, because that's going to be most likely the county where that event is recorded. Okay, so that is how I use the Family History Wiki and, of course, the map feature on mapofus.org in order to understand a little bit more about the records that were created, when and where they were created, if they exist at all, and then how those boundaries affect those records. So then, of course, the next stop is going to be the card catalog. Card catalog is found if you hover over search, so just move your mouse over the search button, go down and click on card catalog. That's going to show you a listing of all of the databases on Ancestry.com. So in this case, Ancestry.com has 31,436 databases as of today. You can see there are millions, in some cases billions, of records in a single database. Some of those databases get really small where they just have a couple dozen records. So it just depends. Lots of databases, lots of different records. The easiest way to use the card catalog is to use the filters over here on the left-hand side, or if I'm looking specifically for information about a state, I'm just going to type the name of the state here in that title field. So I'm going to type the word Texas, click search. It's going to tell me there are 201 databases that contain records about Texas or with Texas in the title. Now I could go through and look at each of those databases, but today we're specifically interested in birth, marriage, and death records. So now I can just use this filter, click on that, and there are 19 databases that contain birth, marriage, or death records and have the word Texas in the title. So what I'm looking at here on this list, it's always going to be sorted by popularity. That's the default. We figure that if most people are searching this database, that's going to be most likely what you're interested in. You can change that sort by. You can sort by database title. You can sort by the date that it was last added or updated. In this case, we're going to put those 3 brand new databases at the very top of the list. You can also sort it by record count so that the largest databases are at the top. So database title is probably alphabetical, is probably the one I use most often, followed by date added so that I can get the new stuff at the top of the list. Date added or updated in this case. Now, When you're looking at vital records on Ancestry.com or anywhere, there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. Sometimes state or country government organizations that manage these records will only provide Ancestry.com with an index to the records. So in this case, we have had the Texas Birth Index from 1903 to 1907. If I hover over that, you see I get this little pop-up card. We've had that online at Ancestry.com since May of 2005. This database has 17.1 million records in it. Again, it starts in 1903 because that's when the state mandated birth registration and required the counties to report it to the state. And then it goes through 1997. Texas is one of the states that has very loose privacy laws. Birth, marriage, and death records are considered public record. And so you'll see some of these where the dates are a lot more recent than a lot of states that you're interested in. So that's the birth index. But that is just an index, which just means that it gives you the very minimum information. Usually it'll give you the child's name, birth date and place, and sometimes it'll also give you the parents' names, including the mother's maiden name, which is great, but the certificates themselves have more information. We're going to take a look at a couple of examples so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, the marriage records for Texas, again, this is just an index, again, put online in 2005. There are 16 million of those records. The marriage collection has a little bit of an anomaly, however. The Texas marriage records start in 1814. They go through 1809 or 1909. Then there's a gap, a really big gap, until they pick up again in 1966. And then just this summer, we actually updated this database to go through 2011. So it's marriage records through 2011. One of the things that you can do whenever you're looking at a database on Ancestry.com is you can actually check and see if there's additional information in this database description underneath the search box. And in this case, there is. So if you scroll down, I'm in the database, right? I just opened up that Texas Marriage Collection database. I'm going to scroll down past that search box, and what I'm going to see is here's the source information, where all this information was compiled from. Below that is a database description that explains what these records are, what was indexed, where you can go to get the original record, because remember, this is just an index in this case. And then if I scroll down past that, what I'm going to discover is this table that lists the counties and the year ranges that are included in this particular database. And so here I can see some of the counties, the records don't start until that second section of dates, 1966 to 2011. Some of these databases, or some of these counties only have records in this database that start in the 1860s, some go back to the 1840s, and in some cases back to the 1830s. Again, remember, Texas didn't become a state until the mid-1840s, and until 1903, those records were all kept at a county level only. And so now what we're seeing is, as new counties are formed, they start keeping their own records. So my guess is if I was to look up Kaufman County, it probably became a county in 1849. But if your family was living in what is now Kaufman County before that, you need to check that map, see how Kaufman County was formed, what other counties was it created from, so that you know what county to search your marriage records in. Now, I'm going to scroll back up here to this search box, and we're actually going to do a couple of searches in the marriage records, and then we're going to take a look at those recent birth and death records and talk about those for just a minute. So one of the things that I do when I am in a specific database doing a search is I actually enter less information than if I was doing a global search across all 13 billion records. Excuse me. Excuse me. If I was doing a global search across all 13 billion records on Ancestry.com, I might want to enter more information in order to narrow or filter my search results. But when I'm looking in a specific database, even though this particular database has 16 million records in it, I might want to get a little bit more broad. So for example, my first search might just be anybody with the last name of Noack. And now there's 984 of them. So now I might want to filter it down a little bit more, particularly to those Noacks who were married in Washington County. Now you'll see I've marked both of those exact. Marking a county exact for a marriage record, because marriage records are recorded at the county level, is a good idea. You can also say this county and adjacent counties if you're not quite sure where they lived or how those boundaries were affected. Marking a surname exact, not always the wisest thing to do, because surnames can be mistranscribed or misindexed or even just miswritten on an original record. And it happens. So I might do an initial search with this set to exact, and then I might try a few different spelling variations or use these filters here to try different spelling variations. But for the purposes of this search, I'm just going to do all Noacks who were married in Washington County. I'm going to go ahead and click search, and now I have 4 of them. And so that is the kind of focused searching that I can do with a specific marriage collection. I know I have family who lived in this county. I know this is their last name. I want to see everybody who's associated with that name in that county. I do that all the time with different families, different surnames in my family, where I'll pick a county where I know they lived, I'll plug in a surname, and I'll be able to pull up all of the examples of that. Now, we're going to look at a record here, and just so, again, so that you can see this is just an index. This is not the original record. The index does still have some really great information on it, including the maiden name of the woman, the age of the bride and groom, the date of marriage, and the county where they were married. However, a marriage certificate will give you additional information. Sometimes it will give you information about residence and occupation of the bride and groom. Sometimes it will even give you information about their parents' names and birthplaces. Or sometimes it will give you a specific location for that marriage, including who performed that marriage, whether it was a justice of the peace, a minister, or some other religious figure. So that information on an original certificate is always going to give you more clues to do your family history, but this index hopefully is enough to just get you started. So that's the marriage collection on Ancestry.com. Let's talk now in our last few minutes here about these top 2 brand new collections. First is Texas birth certificates. So remember, the state started keeping birth records in 1903, and so this database, this Texas birth certificates database, is going to overlap with this Texas birth index database. So you're going to have people that are going to be in both, same people, right? This is an index that we've had online for 8 years. This is new certificates that have just been put online. Now, the new certificates have a little bit of a different privacy attached to them. In this case, they only go through 1932. That's what the state was willing to share with us at a birth certificate level. If I come over here, you're going to see there are 2.2 million records in this particular collection. And when I pull them up, you're going to see that these particular records are really, really rich records. So we're going to look here at Harry Shipman. So Harry DuPont Shipman, again, a birth date, a birthplace, father's name, mother's name, including her maiden name. And that's great. That's what would have been provided in the index. But now we have an original certificate to look at as well. And there are a few new pieces of information that are available because of that. So a couple of things. First of all, it lists the legitimacy of the child, which gives you clues about the parent's marital status. It lists whether the child was born alive or stillborn. Sometimes, oftentimes, we end up with children born into a family and we don't know about them because they never appear in a census. And so these are the kind of records where the only kind of records where we're going to find that. It lists information about the nationality of both the father and the mother, and of course then there's that mother's maiden name. Lists the residence of the parents, the occupation of the father, and then the information about the person who reported that particular birth. So really, really great information on these records. Now, one of the things that you need to know is that these records also, the form of these records changed over time. And so there are times where you'll see different information on these certificates. As a matter of fact, if I just go back here, I think I've marked one that I can pull up. well, actually, let me do it this way. Let me search for a different family. What happens is, as the forms change over time, or as different counties use different forms at different times, what you're going to discover is different or new information. In particular, some of these forms start to list the mother's, how many children the mother has had. And so here's an example, right? So this says number of children born to this mother prior to this birth. In this case, it's none. And then the next question is number of children born of this mother now living. And of course it's 1 because she just had this baby. And so this piece of information down here on this form that starts to show up in the 19 teens, you're going to start to see information that leads you to more records about more children in that family. It also includes this form also includes the age of the father and the age of the mother, as well as the birthplace of both the father and mother. So excellent information, again, that's not on the index for this particular record. You have to be looking at the original certificate in order to get that level of detail or that level of information. So again, that's the Texas birth certificates. They start in 1903. They go through 1932. Now, if you have family in Texas born after 1932, you can still order a birth certificate using the birth index. You can still order that from the state. There's just some privacy issues that they won't allow us to put those online after 1932. So that's it doesn't mean that they're not accessible or not available. It just means that's all that's available to be put online. Now, the last database we're going to take a look at here in our last few minutes together, again, this just went online last week. These are the Texas death certificates. They start again in 1903 when the state started keeping that registration or that information. And in this case, these records go through 1982, 4.6 million records in this particular collection. Again, when I'm searching a specific database, I tend to be much more broad or put in the minimal amount of information when I do my first search, just to get a feel for what's included in this particular database. So in this case, again, I put in this last name. This is my great-grandmother's maiden name, and here there are 442 of them, which really is not that many, all things considered. Right here on the first page, there is an entry for my Aunt Selma. She's actually, let's see, it's my grandfather's aunt, but I knew her. She was a beautiful, beautiful artist and used to paint me pictures, and she owned a hotel just outside of Dallas, and I remember visiting her as a child. So here is her death certificate, and we'll use that as an example. Again, the index, which has been available for a while, has some limited information, excellent information, but it is limited. It has her birth date and place. It has her residence, her parents' names, including her mother's maiden name, how old she was when she died, and then her death date and place. However, looking at this original certificate, we get some additional information. In this case, we get information about where exactly she died. In this case, she was pronounced dead on arrival at Parkland Hospital. It has information about her marital status. She's listed as widowed. It could, if she had served in the military, it would have information about her military status. Here's some information about her occupation. She's the owner and manager of a motel. The residence of where or her address where she's living. The cause of death. Now, for those of you who are looking into family history for family health purposes, this becomes really important information when you can start to map particular illnesses or particular causes of death to your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and their siblings. You're going to start to see some patterns in your family of things that maybe you need to be concerned about or things that you need to watch out for. So cause of death on a death certificate is really useful information both genealogically and for health reasons. Over here it lists how long they've been afflicted with that particular illness or cause of death. And if I scroll down a little bit more here, we're going to see the signature of the attendant, in this case who it was that certified the death certificate, information about burial, and this is really useful for those of you who haven't yet been able to discover where your ancestors are buried. Very often often that's going to be listed on the bottom of the death certificate where the body was removed to. Sometimes it will list, in this case, both a funeral home and the intended cemetery where she will be buried. Either one of those pieces of information could lead you to more records. The final piece of information on a death certificate, and it's probably one of the most overlooked pieces of information, but a very, very vital piece of information, is the name of the informant. Now remember, these forms change over time, so the information isn't always going to be in the exact same place on every form, but the informant's name is really, really important. It helps you understand how valid or invalid the information on the certificate might be, especially if you know who this person is. Now, in this case, I happen to know that Anna is my Aunt Selma's daughter, and so she is, and this is her married name, which is, again, another clue. If I hadn't known who my grandpa's cousin Anna married, now I have a clue about what her maiden name might be. So that informant information is really useful. And remember, whoever this informant was, depending on the circumstances and lots of circumstances, the information that they provide on this certificate is very much under a stressful situation, right? A loved one has just passed away, and it doesn't matter that she was afflicted with this illness for 10 years, or if, it was a sudden thing, it's still a stressful situation. And so always look at the information on a death certificate with that kind of an eye or that idea in mind. I've seen death certificates where somebody said, okay, well, what was her father's name? And they listed her father's name. And then they'd say, what was her mother's name? And they'd list, their mother's name, or they'd list their father's name instead of listing the father and mother of the deceased, because they don't hear the question clearly. They're not thinking clearly in that moment. So death certificates are wonderful, wonderful information, but like all sources, any sources, anywhere, you always have to look at them a little bit critically and compare this source of information to all other sources of information that you've collected about a person before making determinations about what or how you enter that information into your family tree and how you use that information to climb up your tree to the next generation. So that is the basics of our Texas birth, marriage, and death collection. Again, you're going to want to get really familiar with the card catalog. Just type in the name of the state in order to narrow down the collections to that state. Use the filters over here to find a specific record type, and then sort that either alphabetically or by when the records were added to get to the record you're most interested in. The Learning Center Family History Wiki, again, you can browse to the state by clicking on this red book link, or you can come over here and actually type in the name of the state and the type of record that you're interested in order to pull up that specific article. Hopefully that was useful information to you. I know I still have a lot of time to spend in those Texas birth and death records. Lots of cousins still to find and information to verify and validate about them. But hopefully I'll have some time to do that. We're having a quiet Thanksgiving here, so hopefully I'll have some time to work on my family history research. Here in the U.S., it is Thanksgiving week, so there will be no show on Thursday as I will be spending time with my family. I hope that wherever you are and whatever you're doing, you have a happy Thanksgiving as well. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.